is basically intended to bring you from a relatively cold start, assuming that you do have a basic knowledge of using Mestrelab, and I would like to try to bring you to the point where you have a decent understanding of the general functionality that's available in the software by the end of the seminar. So I think in the chat window you can see that there's a place where you can ask questions, and Ollie's kindly monitoring that for me, and then at some point in time I'll pause things and see if there's questions that need to be answered and see if those could be tackled now. But this is going to be a mixture between PowerPoint and live demo, so there's lots of room for things to go wrong. So I know you've all been there and seen it happen, so I'm sure you'll give me a little bit of leeway. Thanks a lot. So let's go. Have to learn how to advance the. I'm going to change to this view. Okay. Right. So the overview of the webinar today is that I'm going to start with looking at some data sets, and I'm just going to analyze them extremely quickly, and the purpose of this really is to just show you how basically how quickly and easily these things can be done. And then once I've done that, I'm going to settle in and talk a little bit more detail about data import. The general working with arrayed data is important to understand and have a bit of a feel for, because it's really the underpinning of everything to do with reaction monitoring. Everything goes into data arrays. It's how we deal with things. And there's huge flexibility that's to be gained if you do know how to understand and manipulate the arrays. The data analysis panel is the main way in which you communicate with the data, or manipulate the data, I should say. What I'll then do is to go through two examples, walk through number 1 and walk through number 2. And these are designed to show you in a little bit more detail how things work. And then finally, what I plan to do towards the end is to go quite quickly through the reaction monitoring wizard and the reaction monitoring listener, because these are functionalities that really deserve a lot more time for me to explain them to you properly. So the intention today is to just show you what they can do. So it's worth mentioning that when you buy Mestrelab software, you get quite a lot of functionality already in terms of dealing with array data, and these can be integral data, and there's quite a lot there that you can do. But the key to using the reaction monitoring plugin is that it takes you into a sphere where you can work totally in a framework where everything is a function of concentration versus time. So you're really building up classical kinetic data plots of concentration versus time, and there's a whole array of ways in which you can do that, achieve that, and you'll see some of those today. I've got a few of my favorites which I tend to rely on, I'm afraid, but there is a lot of scope for ways to do it differently. So what you get with the reaction monitoring, as I say, is this ability to work in this concentration versus time, and then you also get these two at the end here, the wizard and the listener. So let's crack on without further ado and get to the meat of things. So these are some quick walkthroughs, so let's open up some data. So the first of these is an Agilent data set where the assumption is that the data have been collected as a single array, so there's a single file, the FID file, that contains all of the data in it. And here we go. So let's expand this out a wee bit. And we can see peaks going away and peaks growing in. And we can view these as a bitmap, which helps you to see peaks that go away and peaks that come in. And sometimes you can also see these superimposed as well. So these are all the data, one on top of one another. And the utility of this may not be obvious right now, but it is useful, and when you start using these a bit more, you'll see that. So, okay, let's assume that we want to analyze these data. I'm going to use this peak at about 3.5-ish or so as my starting material. So I'm going to go to Advanced Data Analysis, Create, and I'm just going to do a standard integrals graph for the moment because this is the simplest form that you can do with any version of Mestrelab. So let's click on that. And you see the cursor's changed to the integral symbol. And what I'm going to do is just drag over the area that I want to see. And what happens is that that goes through the data and picks up the areas for all the for that region across the entire data set of 120 or so data vectors. And just as easily I can come in here and I'm now going to select something that represents product, so this guy at 3.25 or so, and that shows that over there. And if I wanted now, I could come over here and I could start fitting to this. And so that's applied, that's the red line over there. And I can choose the other integral region, and now I'm going to fit that one. 3-parameter fit to that. Okie dokie. And let's just report that. And there you go. So that's just showing you one quick analysis. Obviously a lot more that you can do, but that's one example. Second quick walkthrough. Let's open up a new page here. And in this case, I'm going to do two things differently. I'm going to read in an array data set that typically comes off a Brooker spectrometer. So here we tend to have a set of directories under one common directory, and these represent the data that were collected as a function of time. So there's a script that helps you do this. So if I go to Scripts, Import, Directory Spectra Stack Import, you see here a new dialog, and I'm going to choose example 2. This will be my top directory, if you like, and these are all the data points that sit underneath here. So the assumption is that within each of these data sets is a FID file that's going to be read in. So I'm going to select this folder, and everything below that will be read. Okay, so these we needn't worry about too much. Notice that we can apply import decimation. What that means is that if you had a lot of data and you only want to look at every second or every third or every fourth of them, you could do so at this stage. So let's reduce that down to everyone. And then we've also got the ability to apply visual decimation, and that's purely what it says. It just decimates the data in a visual sense so that you're not pushing around as many pixels on the screen, so things can go a bit faster. We've also got the ability here to choose the nucleus that we read. So if you do have data that is acquired interleaved, in the sense that you might acquire, say, a proton spectrum and a phosphorus spectrum at the same time, and then and then do that for every time point, you can select to only import proton spectra or other nuclei, if you like. And lastly, you can also choose to apply processing templates, and if you like, and you've spent a lot of time manipulating the data on the spectrometer in TopSpin, you could just read the 1R files, the process files, if you wanted. So anyway, let's get this started. You can see actually that this is interleaved data. It is pulling in phosphorus data there, but it will skip over them as it builds the stack plot. probably should have had a little bit of spectral decimation here just to make this go a wee bit faster, but hopefully it'll get done soon. Turn that off for now. What I'm going to do once this is all in and ready to go, I'm going to process this as a concentration curve for you. So this is now using, this will now be using the reaction monitoring plugin, if you like. I think we're almost done. There we go. We are done. Right, so I've got this nice little window over here where I can see a nice starting material and a nice product being formed. So that's the starting material being consumed. That's the product being formed at 4.9 ppm. So now I need to tell it that under advanced I'm going to do some data analysis and I want to create a concentration graph. Okay, so this is going to use the reaction monitoring stuff. Now the easiest way to do this, the easiest way to get into a sphere where concentrations are known is to have the situation where your first spectrum or one of the spectra contains compound at a known concentration, although there are other ways too. So let's just, as this is a quick walkthrough, let's assume that we know that. So when you do the first integral region, it's going to ask you a little bit of extra information. It's going to say, okay, how many nuclides are there for that signal, for that multiplet area? There's 2. And I'm going to, the concentrations in millimolar units, you can change those. I'm going to work on the initial concentration method, and I'm going to use index of 1. And I'm going to assume that the concentration at the start of the reaction was 100 millimolar. I'm going to click on OK, and it's going to generate the curve that shows the consumption of starting material. Now when I click on, or when I generate subsequent regions, in this case for product, all I have to do now is to tell it how many nuclei or nuclides correspond to that region. So again, this is 2, and it builds that curve for me. And all subsequent curves now use what I've done in the first stage, which was to generate a concentration conversion factor. So now you notice that the curve that we've generated is one of concentration versus time, and that's exactly what we want to do if we want to work in the kinetic dimension. Again, we can apply fitting. This could have been done. This could have been done automatically if I wanted, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are the quick run-throughs. So let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to introduce some more interesting stuff. So that was a quick dash. Now we move down to a little bit more detail. So in terms of data import, and starting right at the top again, I mentioned that in the case of Agilent data, where you have a single file, a single FID file where the data are arrayed therein, perhaps using the pre-acquisition delay or D1, it's a pretty easy import process in that you just open the file in the usual fashion, the file open fashion, and that's all pretty standard. In the case of Brooker data, you saw me use this import spectra stack example, script I should say, and that's the easiest way to do it. There are other ways of doing it, but if you do it this way, you get a lot of additional functionality that allows you to have more flexibility and also it'll help you to construct the time axis correctly. Because what it will do is to read the timestamp when the directories were created normally. Okay, and the third way that you'll see right at the end is to use the reaction monitoring wizard, and so that'll come up later. Now, we spoke about array data, and I'm showing you some slides now, but I will actually bring the data in and show you this properly, so to speak. But I want you to have this in a textual way so that you can come back to it and look at it more closely if you like. So array data are important in Mestrelab. We use them for all sorts of analyses, whether it's diffusion or T1s or reaction monitoring. And you have this relationship of being able to start with a set of 1D spectra and turn them into a stack of spectra, and then, if you like, go back to all the 1D spectra, or turn them into, or pull out certain spectra from that stacked array. And this is part of the huge versatility that you have within this sort of stacked spectra arena. I showed you that you can view the stack as just that, a stack of spectra, and you can put angles on that if you like to improve the visibility. You can superimpose them, as I showed you briefly as well, and that helps you find outliers. So if it turns out that, for example, a number of your spectra are misphased, it'll be clear when they're superimposed that that's the case, and in fact you can, in that mode, make your way to those misphased spectra and do something with them. And then you also saw this bitmap contour plot as well, which was a quick way to see which peaks, if you like, are static in their concentration and which are going up and which are going down, and it allows you to quickly zero in on the portion of the spectrum that was open to further analysis. We spoke about visual decimation, and as I say, this is a visualization thing only, so when you actually generate your curves, it's still using all the data. But within the stacked mode, you've got the visual decimation. I'll show you how to turn that off and on. Now, these points here around active spectra are important because it allows, what you can do is you can make one or more spectra in the stack active, and what happens when it becomes active is that the spectra has a little blue background. And an active spectrum is one that when you apply some processing, in the sense perhaps of phase correction maybe, or baseline correction, those active spectra will be acted upon and the others will be ignored, if you like. So this is an important point. You might have one or two spectra that need to have something done to them, and you need to go there and fix them, and all the others are okay. But this ability is important. Now, a lot of the functionality works through two tables, which you may or may not need to actually worry about, but this is where all the kind of heavy lifting is being done. So I'll say that much of this is hidden, but there are two tables that you may need to go to if you'd like to do things in a more belt and braces way. So the stacked spectra table is important when you're selecting and deselecting active spectra, and also when you're doing decimation. The array data table has got a slightly different function. Okay, so this is array data. As I say, I will show you this live in a minute. And the last PowerPoint slide for this little bit is to show you the data analysis panel. And this is an important one because this is where you really can do 99% of your work once you've got the data in. So we've got in here various controls for selecting new regions. We've got basic settings for reaction monitoring. We've got array manipulation through this guy over here. And through everything on this top line over here, we can adjust things to the columns. And these work in this way. So the X column is the time dimension, or the time column if you like. So here you can see that array vector number 9 is set to time equals 0, and normally that would be at the top. These are the data values. So we've got for the first region that I selected is called yx, and these are the numbers for it. In this case, in integral units, as you can see from there. And in the y prime column next to it, you'll see the fitted numbers, which are there as a consequence of having done the 3-parameter exponential fit. And then the next region is called y1, and it's got a y1 prime column that is associated with it, and so on and so forth. So this is the second region, third region, and it goes on as long as you'd like it to. And I'll show you this in more detail. So let me start telling you what I will show you and just do it. So we're going to open a new data set. This is an Agilent data set, so there's only one file to find. This FID file, which you see is biggish, so that's telling me that there's quite a bit of data in there. So I'm using the mouse wheel to increase the vertical expansion, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Z, which is the same as pressing the expansion button there, to look at this region over here. And actually, before I do that, let's just note that the TMS is not on 0. So let's fix that. So if I press reference and I click on there, I can tell it that this is at 0 ppm. Okay, you can see that's fixed. Go back to this, and these are the regions I want to work on. Now the reason that I've chosen this data set is that it shows a very common feature of reaction monitoring data, which is one where the data, where peaks move with through the time course of the reaction. So this is often a consequence of protonation or deprotonation causing that chemical shift change. And there's two ways that can be tackled with this particular data set. One is to basically align things using the TMS peak, or I can work with the data as they stand right now. And I'm going to assume that the T1 alignment, the alignment of the TMS isn't available to us. So let's do things kind of the harder way, as it were, because it does show you how you can work with things. Right, so we want to do a concentration curve. So back to Advanced, Data Analysis, Create Concentration Graph, and I want to select a region that's going to be only as big as I need it to be. I don't really want to select from here to over here sort of thing, so I cover all of this, because then I'm integrating noise, which I don't really want to do. So I just want to select a tight region like that. I know this constitutes 2 protons, and let's say this is 10 millimolar, and there we go. Now, there is a bit of a problem. It's not too apparent in this data, but it would be in the next data. So if I come now and I say, okay, I want to integrate my product, which is this shifting peak at about 1.16, again I want to select a tight region, so I'm going to select that. But you can see that with the peak, with the multiplet moving, at a certain stage the most high field part of that triplet goes out of range, if you like. So this is 2 protons. So we're going to get a wonky curve out of this. You can see it's a bit odd. Now I'm going to, so we need to fix that, and to do that we have this capability of being able to move things, move the integral region. So using these handlers, I can shift the integral region in this way, and I can make it follow whatever happens to be the way things change with time. There. And for my product peak, I can do the same. If you keep your eye on the curve at the top, you can see that that's changing as I fix this. Whoops. There we go. That's a lot nicer, isn't it? So, the other thing that you can change is are the left and right edges of any particular handle. So if it turns out that you had another peak sitting over here that was getting in the way, you could move this out or move it in more snugly with multiplet or something like that. So you've got quite a bit of leeway as to the way in which you use these and drag them around and select your regions, and this makes it quite powerful, really. Now let's go back and show you the full spectrum. I'm going to start messing things up a little bit. So if I wanted to do some processing on this, I want to basically explain to you the whole business of active spectra. So if I wanted to do phasing across the whole spectral suite, so across all the vectors in one go, I can do that just by opening up manual phase correction, which is Shift P on the keyboard. And as I do that, everything's changed. So I'm going to do Control Z to go back to where I was before. And I'm now going to show you how you can actually just do processing on a single spectrum. And I do that by making a particular spectrum active. So if I say, okay, well, the first one's a bit rubbish and it needs to be fixed, if I hold down the Alt key and click on that spectrum, you'll see that, or you may not see that, that's actually now got a blue tinge to it. And I can click Alt, hold on the Alt and the Shift key, and maybe go up to here. And that's perhaps a bit clearer now, because I've selected a range of spectra now, the first 10 or 12 spectra there. And what happens now if I do phasing is that, and I'm going over to the phase correction thing, now only the active spectra will have their phase changed. Okay, all the non-active ones are left alone. So this is the way you manipulate, get into the fine detail of your spectrum. So I'm going to, again, Control Z, Control Z to reverse what I've just done. So I hope you understand this business of active spectra. The way you manipulate these now and turn those off being active is to come around down to the side here. And actually, let's do it from the data analysis panel. So I'm going to clear the selection. Okay, so the selection are the active spectra. Right, so as I mentioned, there are a couple of tables that you may get involved with as you become more familiar with the reaction monitoring functionality. They're a bit awesome when you look at them the first time and you think, oh my goodness. But fortunately, most of the stuff that's relevant is accessible through the data analysis window over here. So let's look at a couple of these. So you notice that, let's just do it methodically and go start at the top and work our way across for this one. So we start over here, and this is the way we can choose different types of graphs. This is the way we can choose different reporting, and this is the way we can choose new areas. We've got some setup things over here. I can set the number of handles for a region, for example. And from here I can do a few things, like for example I can show decimation, and I can choose a step value of 4, for example. So I want to see 1 to 60 viewing every fourth spectrum, and there you go. Notice that the spectrum at the top, the graph at the top hasn't changed, just the visualization of the data in the bottom. Now we come on to the second row, and everything on this row here relates to columns. So these columns here, so I can choose a particular column. I've got 2 ranges specified, so let's look at the lower field one. And from here I can look at some things to do with that column, specifically for that column. So I can change this to, the name of this to starting material, the label. It's changed over there. I can, if I edit it, I can change the way in which the concentration was determined. So it's this stuff here. And if I come down to fit, I can turn this off and on, but importantly too, I can bring up the model function window, which allows me to select the 3-parameter exponential fit over here. I can ask it to calculate it and click OK, and there we go. I'll come to the second one, and I'm just going to do the fit quickly. Okay. Now everything to do with rows is determined by these buttons over here and by these top things over as well. Now this is an important one, this array data, this one over here, because it allows you to override the time points. So the way it read the data was to say, okay, the first one's acquired at 10 seconds, the next one at 750 seconds, and so on and so forth. But if, for example, it got that wrong and you needed to override that, you can do so by clicking on the X, this array data, and then the 3 dots. And this brings up this little sub-window over here. And from here, you can change, you can just type this in. So I is the index, so it says for I equal, so this will just give me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Or I can put in a slightly more complicated formula. This says that the first spectrum was acquired at t equals 0, and then it was every 60 seconds after that. So if I click on that, those will change. So that's kind of an important one that you may need. I'm going to show you, I'm going to turn that back to what it was before. Okay. Right, I see time's passing. I need to speed up. There are things that you can change to do with this display over here. So if I double click on this, I get at properties, which allows me to change colors. I can change the x-axis units. This again is just a display property, so these are changed to minutes now. Hasn't changed the fitting. It's just to help that. So that's just to mention that. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say. Those are the points I want to make with this particular data set. I've got one more data set to bring in, and that will allow me to exemplify a few more points. So this is a Brooker data set. So we use this guy. We go to example 4, select the folder. This time I'm going to be clever, and I'm going to ask for every fourth spectrum. And I'm going to read them in. Okay, job done. So what we've got here. Okay, this is a bit of a more of a real life situation where someone's done an experiment in a reaction vessel. And so the first couple of time points are a bit rubbish. You can see there's odd things happening there, so we're going to have to do a bit of extra work here. So let's get into the situation where we can work with this. So there's There's a peak over here which I'm going to take as my starting concentration. So I want a concentration graph. I thought I could do that. Create concentration graph. Okay, this is one of these moments when you're doing a live demo and everything has stopped working the way you'd like it to. I've got it. Okay, let's lost the integral for a second. Okay, let's go with that. Then let's zoom in on the region over here, and I'm going to try and speed up a wee bit so I've got time to show you some other stuff. Okay, so let's choose that, for example. Sorry, I need to choose it this way. Integrate that. Let's say that's 2 protons, and building some curves over there. Now, what I wanted to show you here is another important way to manipulate the data, and that's to reset the t=0 time point. So you'll see that we've got a couple of data points here that were required where nothing was basically happening, and what I'd like to do is to skip out that first point and set the second point as t=0. So this can be done on the table. I can highlight row number 2, I can right-click on it, and I can select use as time origin. Or I can do it from the data point over here. I can right-click on the point and say use as time origin, and that's what I've just done. And if you look at the table, you see that the first row has now been zeroed out, and now the second row has time equals 0. Okay? You can also use this to delete rogue points. So, for example, this point right here, I might decide is just a little bit off, and I'd like to delete it. So I can take that one away. I can delete that one. If I want to get slightly better curves. This is important when you have curves that track over and actually cross over a different peak. So for the particular reaction spectrum vector that has that crossover point, you'll find that there's a much bigger integral value for that, and you want to delete it. So you can delete it in exactly that way. You just right-click on it and delete that point. And when you do that, the whole calculation business gets updated for you. So this, I'm referring to the fit. Okay, and let's report that. There we go. Okay, so that's basically the end of what I hope is a reasonable introduction to the basic functionality in terms of doing reaction monitoring and analyzing the data. What I'd like to do in the last few minutes is to quickly zip through the reaction monitoring wizard. This will have a lot of familiar stuff, so I can go through it fairly fast, and also the listener. So let's do that. This, what's the point of having this? Why did we bother? So reaction monitoring wizard. Here we go. Now, one of the things that you'll see, it's going to lead us through the whole process, basically, that it's designed to either be of use to someone who's perhaps a more naive user or someone who doesn't use it terribly often. So it leads you through the process. Notice too that you can load and save settings. So if it turns out that you want to, you perform the same reaction every time, repeatedly, you can load the settings for the analysis of that reaction and just go through it as if you've gone through the wizard. Right, so the first screen logically deals with data input, and this is an Agilent file because it's got a .fit extension, I know that. The nucleus is not important, so I then go to next. I can specify the way in which the processing is done using a processing template, for example. And I can click on next again if I don't want to keep that. And now it's going to actually import the data. There we go. And these data you've seen before today, yes they are. Okay, so right, what I want to do now is I actually want to zoom in on a region, and it tells me here, there's a little tip, press the space to pan and the control and space bar to zoom. So I'm going to press control, space bar, and that allows me to zoom in on a region like that without changing the cursor from away from being input mode. So I can go ahead and select that, and I see a familiar screen. This helps me determine the response factor. 2 protons for that, 10 millimolar starting concentration. First of those done, and then I can come over and do that one, and do the same again. And if I held down the space bar, I could pan that, find small peaks. You get the drift. Yeah, and I could add to that. So let's assume that we've done everything and we're happy with that in terms of selecting our regions. Notice that you can use your last selection and you can import the selections from file. So let's go to the next bar, and this has to do with the way in which we're going to do our fitting to the extracted data. Move this off to one side. So you can tell it that you don't want to fit or use the last value, last order. I can specify the reaction order, and these are fairly simple, to be honest with you. They aren't that clever. If you've got a species that grows in and grows out, we won't be able to deal with it here. Or we can choose fit to best, and then I'll click on next, and I'll say yes, I do want a report. I can choose whether or not I want to save the Mnova file and or the PDF file, and when I'm finished, that'll be the end of the process, really. So you can see that without a lot of knowledge of reaction monitoring, someone can go quite quickly from data to finished analysis over here where everything is done correctly. In this case, the person might just be interested to see what the levels are of these two products, starting material, whatever they are. But anyway, they can look at that and decide what they want to do with it, and it's quite easy. The last thing I want to show you is really quite different, really. It's this listener. Okay, what is a listener? Listener is simply a way in which to do real-time reaction monitoring. So this is really something that's quite unique, I think, to Mestrelab. This allows all the functionality that I've shown you in the last 45 minutes. Allows you to use all of that for data that are being produced in a real-time fashion. So let's say you have a reaction vessel and you want to monitor the production of products, and you want to quench the reaction as soon as the product is formed completely, because if you don't, then it starts to go off, for example. Or you want to monitor the concentration of a particular impurity, and you know that can't get higher than a certain level, and that's what you need to do. Then this is the way you do it. So what we're going to do with this is that it works quite simply. It's very simple to use in the sense that all you really need to do is to tell it a little bit about where the data are going to appear. So this this import directory is where I'm telling it the data are going to slowly get dropped with time. Okay, I can set a maximum number of spectra and a whole bunch of other options over here, which I'm going to skip over today. I go to the next screen, and I can choose a processing template, which is that one. I go to the next screen, and here's where I basically tell it what I want to do. So let's have a look at this particular line over here. I'm going to click on the edit here, and what it's saying is that in this screen I'm saying that I've got something that I'm calling product, and I need to integrate between these regions here, and there's two nuclides there, and when I do the curve fitting I want to fit to best. And here's where it gets interesting now, because I can set conditions. I can say that when the y value exceeds 5 or some value, I think I actually use 7 is what I need there. So when that y value equals 7, I want it to basically do something. And there's two things I can have it do. One is to give me a message on the screen. That's that over there, which you'll see. And I've asked it also here to basically just show the log file in Notepad on the screen, just as a simple example. But what it's doing here is to fire off a command line. So this is sent off to the command line. So you can have anything you like here. This could be something that controls the instrument or the stirrer or the addition pump, or it could be something that sends off an SMS text message to you, or anything you like that can be sent from the command line that uses an application. So this is what's going to happen here. And you can have multiples of these, and you can have multiple conditions. And this has to do, the lower bit has to do with concentration determination. And when I click on finish, it's just going to go away and just show me very little really. It's just going to say, right, the listener's running. You know, what are you going to do about it? And what I have to do now is to simulate that I'm actually connected to a spectrometer. So I'm not connected to a spectrometer, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these off screen so you're not confused by this. Where did I put them? I think they're there. Okay, I need to stop this and start it again because listener temp listen folder. Okay, let's go through this quickly. Right. So temp listen. So I will show you this. I've got a folder here called listen folder, which currently is empty, will be empty. And I've got a bunch of data sitting in other folders, and I've got a little macro that copies data from these into there, into the listen folder. So I'm going to click on copy RM1, and that's running that. And every second, another spectrum is loaded into that listen folder, and you can see them jumping in here, and you can see the curve being constructed as we go along. It's integrating the region that I asked it to. Remember 7 was our limit. When it hits 7 it should stop working or stop listening. There we go. It just exceeded 7. So it gave me my message. At this time, the product concentration exceeds 7 millimolar. Okay, thank you. And it also showed me in Notepad the log file. So that was created using the command line, if you like. Okay, so that's the listener, and that's really the end of what I seriously want to say today. There are a couple more files, a couple more slides in the presentation here, which I'll make available to you. I think I've explained them all through words, really, so it's not important that I haven't gone through there. So by way of conclusion, I hope that I've convinced you that we've got a core functionality to cover reaction monitoring that's extremely powerful. So it handles array data extremely well. It has great flexibility to make it applicable to a variety of measuring conditions. And it provides an environment within Mnova to deal with all aspects of data manipulation that are relevant to this. We can use this retrospectively with regard to collected data, or using the listener, we can use it in real time. And this is what the last point is over here. So with that, it's 5 minutes to the hour, and I thank you very much for your time and your patience today. And I'm going to take a look at Ollie's questions. Brian Marquez has asked, Mike, what chemistry are you doing? I don't know when you asked that, Brian, but if you'd like to contact me privately, Brian, I'll try to answer your question for you. Bert, so import decimation would only import every nth third. Correct, yeah, import decimation nth third, assuming that that third is of the nucleus type that you've selected. So if you had proton, phosphorus, then if you selected 2, it would select every second proton spectrum. Dan has asked, do the fits have to be sequentially numbered? No, I'm not entirely sure, Dan. I think not. I think it'll just go through them from a lower number to a higher number. I've certainly seen them not start at 1, but start at 500 or something like that. Can they be randomly numbered? Yes, they can, but I'm not quite. Yeah, they can be randomly numbered because the timestamp is read actually from within AccuS rather than from the timestamp of the created directory. So I assume that would still work okay. I'm not entirely sure. Gamage has asked, can you explain more about initial concentration? Okay, that's just to say that it's often the case when you when you start your reaction, you know the amount of your reactant that you've put in. So you know that the reactant you put in 3 microliters of it, and the total volume is 550 microliters. So you can do the numbers and work out what the initial concentration is. So that's what that is, the initial concentration of a species. Normally a starting material, or initial concentration can actually be final concentration as well if you choose it to be the last one, and this comes to completion. No, you don't need QNMR to work out concentrations there. Maria's asked, what's the chemical kinetic meaning of a 3-parameter exponential fit? How do we know which function to choose? The answer to that is that in my experience, it just seems to work out that for most cases, the 3-parameter exponential fit is simply it's just the equation that you saw. It's the normal exponential fit, and that seems to fit a lot of standard kinetic data. As I said, if you have something that grows in concentration and then goes away, an intermediate that's formed, for example, then that would not be applicable with the 3-parameter fit. It is a good fitting function. How do you know which function to use or to choose? I guess you have to eyeball it and see whether the 3 parameter is going to work for you, and if it doesn't, then you'll have to export the data and use some other software, whether it's Excel or something more elaborate to look at the data, to look at the fitting. You can certainly export the data very easily. It's a point I forgot to make. You can export the data very easily and take it into specialist software you might have for modeling chemical reactions. How about biphasic curves in kinetics? We often come across this. I think you'd have to, how would you analyze that, I guess is the question. So whether you can analyze that within Mnova, I guess we'd have to basically see. There are ways, which I didn't show you, to exclude data from the analysis. So you can actually say, okay, I just want to analyze the first quarter of the data points or something like that. And so you would actually be able to analyze the build-up, so the initial rate, if you like, without having to do a log plot or something like that. And another from Sunil, I use HSQC1 to monitor enzyme kinetics. The data is seen in absolute value rather than phases, to mode and peaks are overlapping. How would you work on this data set? We currently do, HSQC1D, yeah. So we don't deal with 2D data, but that's not the question you're asking. In absolute value rather than, so if you show something in absolute value mode, then I guess you lose your ability to quantify it. So I don't know whether quantification would work there. Sunil, perhaps you can send me a data set and I can think a little bit more about your question. I haven't come across that yet. Brian's asked, have you used the listener to send feedback to a spectrometer? Personally, I haven't, but I don't see any reason why a good person working at Brooker can't do that. Paul Tan, can you reset negative concentration data? Okay, I think I know what you're saying. And some of those spectra, some of those plots, you could see that the concentration looks as if it was negative. Yes, you can. Yes, you can do that. Paul, let's speak, and I'll show you how to do that. We've got lots of questions here. Can this import reaction monitoring data as a Brooker serial file, a pseudo 2D array from Simon Watson? The answer is yes. So you do it in a similar way to the way we did the Varian adjuvant, beg your pardon, data. How well it would read the time axis there is probably debatable, and you may well have to specify the time in the way that I alluded to. Yordi asked, sometimes used to crash when you load a lot of spectra. Any recommendations to avoid that? Well, I find that I can load 500, 600, 700 data sets. You know, what's a lot? How can you avoid that? You can do import decimation, I guess. If you're working up to 400, 500, 600, 700 data sets, I don't anticipate problems. If you are having problems there, then it may be that your hardware isn't up to the task. And lastly, Gamage has asked, reaction has started when you take the first spectrum in the array, then the initial concentration is not the calculated concentration, correct? This may be okay for the large concentration, but not the smaller. What do you think? Well, you're quite correct, Gamage, there. Using the first spectrum there would not give you the initial concentration, and then you'd have to rely on one of the other ways in which to determine the concentration. Perhaps if the reaction's gone to completion, you can use the last data set to work out the final concentration. So the final if you see the final concentration of your product is the same as the initial concentration of your reactant, then you could do it that way. But there are other ways of determining concentration, and we can go through that next time. I'm conscious of time, and I've raced through the questions. If you asked a question or I've answered a question and you're still confused about it and you want me to say a little bit more about it, please write to me. Please write to me about anything. You know, if there's anything to do with reaction monitoring, I'm your point man at Mestrelab. Speak to me, mike@mestrelab.com. If you're just getting going, if you've got a complicated question, if you've got a data set that's particularly challenging to analyze, please just get in touch with me and I'll do my level best to set you straight. So, as I say, you'll be able to see the presentation that'll become available, and the video of the webinar will also become available on our web page soon. So I wish you luck with everything that you do with reaction monitoring. I've got to say that it's a real pleasure of mine to work in this area, and I absolutely love it, and I know that there's people in the audience today who use it and love it, and there's others who use it and love it, and what I've spoken about today is too basic for them, so that's probably why they're not here. It's a great thing to do, and I really, really do encourage you to do lots more of it, and you can get great data out of it. So please do the experiments. Please use Mestrelab for your analysis, because I think it's the greatest way to do it. It's the fastest way to do it. There are other ways you can do it, and there's no question about that, but there's wonderful stuff you can do within Mnova. This is functionality we've been developing both in-house and in collaboration with guys at Lilly's. Andreas and Jonas there have helped us in some ways, and so this is really quite mature for us. We've got a good 4 or 5 years of experience in dealing with this type of data, and I hope that's been apparent from what you've seen today. There's tons that I haven't shown you yet that help you deal with different situations, and hopefully we'll cover some of those in 3 weeks' time. So with that, I again thank you for your patience and forbearance today, and for spending some time with me, and I wish you every luck, and I'll sign off there and wish you a good day. Bye-bye now.